Welcome to Everyday Pioneers, the podcast about how real people build strong financial futures. I'm your host, Chelsea, and on behalf of Pioneer Federal Credit Union, we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get real. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Today we're going to be discussing something that I think a lot of people have had to navigate in their lifetime, and if they haven't, they may have to at some point, and that is medical expenses. I'm so pleased to welcome Candace as our guest today. Candace is a fellow pioneer who I've had the joy of working with and hearing about her and her husband's journey over the past few years. So I'm so glad she's here today. Hi, Candace. How are you?
Hi, Chelsea. I'm doing great.
Good. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So we start each episode with this same question, and that is, what about the credit union movement most resonates with you?
I would say what resonates the most with me is just that whole idea of people helping people, because you really get into understanding the challenges that people go through and leveling with them, and then also finding a way to help them through it too. I've been, benefited from that as well, but I just find it to be something that's I'm grateful to have it in my life, and I know many others probably do too. And I think it's just a really great concept that also plays out in life that I'm really appreciative for.
That's really cool. You made a personal connection to it too. So often it's just our work, right? It's just what we do. But I love that you have also experienced it on the flip side. And that's really why we're doing this podcast, is showing the personal side of who we are as Pioneer, our employees, the stories we have, the things we've been through, so that our members and our communities know that they're not alone. And we really do want to connect on them on a more personal level, and people helping people is a great way to do that. And that's what we're doing on this podcast. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for sharing that great answer. But now, how about we go ahead and talk about our topic today, which is about how you and your husband have navigated medical expenses. So let's start with having you tell me a little bit about you and your husband and what you guys have experienced regarding unexpected medical expenses.
Oh, so as far as unexpected medical expenses, so a little bit about our story. When I was in college, my husband and I were still young. We had just gotten married. And honestly, it kind of hits you with a brick, and it hits very fast and very hard. When I was in college, my husband, we just had one day where he wasn't feeling well, and we went to the hospital. And next thing we know, he had to have his gallbladder removed. And that was kind of like the start of everything escalating. We had known previous to that he had Crohn's disease, but to me, I didn't really know what that meant or how that was really going to change his life. But once he had that gallbladder surgery, things just kind of took an escalation, you could say, because he had to drop out of college himself. And after the gallbladder surgery, we met with the doctors who kind of showed us what was going on in his body. So my husband also has a disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis. So what that does is give you a little bit of medical terminology. You have these bile ducts that kind of branch off of your liver that get rid of all the bile that your liver processes. And his bile ducts, they were starting to get hard and narrow. So the bile wasn't flowing through them as freely, and it was getting backed up in his liver. So that started us on all kinds of doctor's appointments. We've been through, I don't know, countless of GI doctors, liver doctors, just trying to find out what exactly he had and find out what we needed to do. We've had quite a few procedures as well. And so, that first surgery that he had for that gallbladder surgery was $10,000. I didn't exactly have that sitting around, especially as a student.
Right.
And, also being a student as well, I'm not very knowledgeable in insurance and making sure that we were covered. We were also still very young, so that we were kind of covered underneath our parents' plans first. And so honestly, the biggest challenge has been learning to navigate health insurance, because I don't know about you, I wasn't taught anything about health insurance or, to make sure that I'm covered. I didn't know what any of that meant. And so we really had through the hard knocks of life, I've learned to manage that much better. I didn't do it great at first.
Wow.
So
Wow. Yeah, that's quite an experience. And just to give people a little bit of an insight where you guys are now, what are you guys currently dealing with as far as medical?
he is on the liver transplant list. So we are waiting to basically get that call that will
Oh,
change our lives forever. We will, and what I mean by that is I have to be ready to leave my home for the next 3 months
wow.
because he will need to be next to the hospital, which is our hospital is down in Utah. So it's 4 hours away from home. And we have two small children. So we have to pretty much have a game plan and everything prepared and ready for that. We thankfully have a lot of great family and friends that are very close and very willing to step in and basically be our village and help us out with
Mhm.
that. So
Wow.
that's kind of what we're on the cusp of. Financially, that is also a huge weight as well to think about because, so first of all, that surgery, just the surgery itself, it's $500,000
Oh my gosh.
just for that surgery. Yes. When
My
I was
breath just
looking
went
at
out of my chest. Ugh.
yeah, yeah. So thankfully I do have great insurance coverage and I
Mm,
have really taken the time to get all that into place. And so all of his medical expenses will be covered, but our travel and stay down there by the
oh.
hospital, that we are still working through and game planning for how that's going to operate. I thankfully have a wonderful job that will allow me to work from remotely. So
Mhm.
we have figured out a few things, but there's still quite a few things that need to fall into place. But that's just preparation work,
Wow.
honestly.
Well, let's take a couple steps back. I mean, that's a wow. I mean, I know you personally, and I'm still like, holy moly.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, going back to your college days, navigating through, I mean, obviously, this has been a long journey from
hmm
college till now. So, my question is, in what ways have you had to pivot and readjust for your finances? You talked about insurance, but we know insurance doesn't cover everything. So, how have you had to figure that out? What ways have you done that?
The biggest way I've done that is I'm so grateful to my parents that basically encouraged me to get an education because
Mm,
if I hadn't been educated, I would not have been able to step in and get a job as quickly and easily as I did because,
mhm,
you know, we're trying to have my husband be the bread maker, but being sick, he just wasn't able to.
right.
And so we really had to pivot and say, mom's got to go to work. Mom needs to take care of this because we also need to take care of dad. So we've had to pivot in that way. Also, we keep things very, very low. I do not go over my budget as far as like we try to keep it in whatever my job will cover as far as
Mm,
financially. I don't want, my husband to like all of a sudden be out sick and then he can't work and we have those finances that will be on top of it as well. So we really kind of keep things very low, pay for cars in cash. When we bought our home was a fixer upper. So we've done a lot of the fixing up work ourselves, which thankfully we have those skills, which has also helped us to keep our mortgage, in a very low costing situation as well. So basically making sure that we aren't borrowing a lot, having a lot of payments out there for things is what we've had to do.
wow. Yeah. There's a lot of planning that goes into that for sure. So, you talked about budgeting, you talked about your parents being, an inspiration for you, you talked about insurance. Are there other resources out there that you were surprised to learn about?
Some resources definitely is, especially if you're faced with medical expenses, contacting the hospital can be a life changer. They have a
Mm,
lot of great programs that, I mean, so that $10,000 that I talked to you about, I talked with the finance office and I was able to apply for, I can't remember exactly what the term was, but apply for basically low income situation. That $10,000 got forgiven down to $500.
wow.
Yes. And so a lot of the hospitals have these great programs that you just need to get in touch with and need to be, get a hold of the finance people and see what they can do to help because there are a lot of great options out there that can help. Um, Other resources as well is making sure that your insurance is covering everything. So when we first started, um, my husband being covered under my mother-in-law, her insurance was out of Idaho and we were living in Utah. So when I finally paid attention to the numbers, it wasn't covering anything.
Hmm.
Like literally nothing was being covered because the plan was out of Idaho. And so me not realizing that caused us a lot of expenses. And also, and then we were still paying for insurance. So I thankfully have now, if you're not familiar with, get with an insurance broker.
Hmm.
Insurance brokers allow you to look at different plans at different health insurances and find what best suits you. So especially for us, previously to Obamacare, there was a lot of pre-existing issues with that, but healthcare is a very, hot topic that changes often. And the best thing is to just work with that insurance broker because they are the expert and they deal with different companies, are able to get you, the best rates for what kind of expenses you will have.
That's a really great resource. I didn't even know that existed. So that's really awesome. So you talked a little bit about budgeting already, but I'm wondering if you can dive in a little deeper on what the day-to-day looks like as you're preparing for these ongoing medical expenses or the ones that are upcoming, like the liver transplant. How do you work through this day to day to make sure you're prepared for these things?
So some of the things that I have done to make sure that I prepare for these things is, so I worked with my financial institution to put together what's called an HSA, so a health
Oh,
savings account, because then money can be taken out of my check and put into that savings account and then specifically used for those medical expenses. The biggest thing about it too is just paying attention to what those amounts are. How much your insurance covers. Honestly, the biggest thing for us right now is the prescriptions. My husband
oh,
has a prescription that costs him, let's see, I think it's about $12,000 every 8 weeks that he has to take it.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So we're upwards of spending over $100,000 every year on that prescription, which thankfully, paying attention to those numbers and how much my insurance is covering, they're covering majority of that. So that's grateful. But I can only imagine if I had been, my college days and not paying attention to those numbers, I would still have quite a hefty bill, I'm sure.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just making sure what your insurance is covering and then how much is left over. Honestly, you know, the beginning of the year is always the hardest because you're trying to hit that insurance deductible. And so that's when you really need to plan for, is that beginning of the year before you hit that insurance deductible. I mean, honestly, we hit it with that first medication
Oh
that I
my
talked
goodness.
about.
Right.
And then we are okay for the rest of the year, but we have to plan for that first one. So
Right. Great advice. So much insight, Candace, already. We're only halfway through questions, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel more prepared already if I have to go down this road. Talking about unforeseen things, I mean, what kind of resources, maybe at a financial institution, can you think of that could be a tool for those who have something come out of the blue? They haven't been able to plan, or they've planned and it hasn't been enough. What kind of emergency tools are in your tool belt that you know about that you want to share?
emergency tools, I would say, like ones that we have utilized, and I know not everybody has access to these, is definitely our family has been very instrumental in helping
Hmm.
us through a lot of this. They are very instrumental in that. Honestly, there are a lot of programs out there too that people just need to get hooked up with. I mean, there's quite a few charities and stuff that really help with those medical expenses, especially for the transplant. Like there's nothing like as far that I've found like on the day to day, but when we're preparing for transplant, there are quite a few that are willing to help. Also, looking into those charities, a GoFundMe page I would not recommend, because when money is given to you through a GoFundMe page, then it's looked at like it's your income, and then you will also be
Oh,
taxed on that. So if you
wow.
hook up with these charities, the charities will take the money for you and then distribute it to your expenses and things of that nature. And so that way you're not increasing your tax bracket looking like you make all this money when it was a one-time payout.
Okay, again, I'm just wow. I don't know how many times I've said it so far, but wow. I would have never known. I've given to those in
Mhm.
times. Like
Well,
thankfully, I have not had to experience an emergency yet in my life, but I've seen the GoFundMe pages thinking, oh, what a great way to give to people. Seeing a lot of money going through those. What great insight. I would have never known that. That's so wild. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. So let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. Think about your entire experience in this entire journey of medical expenses, insurance, whatever it may be. Try and boil it down if you could. What have you learned during this experience?
The thing I've learned the most, I would say, is preparation is key. Like, even though you may not be faced with this right now, preparing yourself, whether it be through education, preparing yourself to, have a good job that, pays well. Also, there are so many resources out there as far as education for, making sure that you have the right health insurance. And also, I would say, there are a lot of great government programs as well. Yeah, biggest thing is I just say, preparation and stay on top of it because it's something that it can grow to astronomical amounts. And if you're not on top of it and you're trying to ghost the, people calling, it's not going to end good. Okay. That ends in lawsuits and your credit tanking. But if you work with people and keep in contact with them, they are much more willing to work with you.
Really good takeaways. And that is the last thing I always ask our guests too is 3 takeaways. You gave us 2 really good ones. You want to throw one more on there to make it a good rounded 3?
My third one would just be, look for the great things that happen as well, because there is a lot of bad that can happen and can really get you down when you're going through this. But we also have seen so many great things happen in our lives as well. And we do not let it restrict us in our thinking for the future. Our future is just as bright as anybody else. And we just might have a little more bumps than some people, and that's okay.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I asked that because that was the best wrap up bow on top to this amazing podcast. Candace, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing so openly and honestly. I know this is going to benefit people, whether they're at the beginning of this journey, maybe even in the middle of it, and they're just learning stuff that's new to them, or, people who have not had to even think about this for their future. I mean, this is just so much great information. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to share and hope that it's beneficial to those that are going through it or, can prepare for it. So
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much to our listeners. We will see you guys all on the next episode. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. We at Pioneer Federal Credit Union have a mission of igniting lifelong partnerships with our members and communities. If there is anything we can do to help you build your financial future, please reach out to us. Visit our website at www.pioneerfcu.org. Pioneer Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the National Credit Union Administration. This podcast is intended to provide general information and should not be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. It's always a good idea to consult a tax or financial professional for specific information on how certain laws may apply to your individual financial situation. Pioneer Federal Credit Union is an equal housing lender.